Nashville.
Direct from CBS News election headquarters in New York. This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Charles Carrault in our newsroom in New York. And Robert Pierpoint in San Clemente, Bill McLaughlin in Saigon, Peter Kalischer in Saint-Laurent-du-Pont, France, and Robert Shackney in Cleveland.
Good evening from our CBS News election headquarters in New York. Campaign 70 is winding up this evening across the country as polls begin closing on one of the most confusing, the exhausting, and perhaps important election years in the nation's history. After much talk about key races, liberal-conservative shifts, the roles of the president and vice president and all that, some 55 to 60 million Americans, less than half the voting age population, it was believed, were voting today. But the turnout at that is greater than expected and is reported heavy in some areas. At stake, the entire House of Representatives, 1/3 of the Senate, almost 3/4 of the governorships, nearly all the state legislatures, and many hundreds of state and local offices and issues. There's mixed weather to accompany the voters' apparent mixed emotions. Rain in part of the east and the Midwest, light snow in one section of the northern plains, generally pleasant skies and temperatures elsewhere. Let's take a quick look at the political checkerboard now, starting in the east with Mike Wallace. Mike?
Walter, one contest stands out above all others in the east, the three-way battle for the New York Senate seat now held by Republican Charles Goodell. The Nixon administration wants him out and wants to replace him with conservative candidate James Buckley. The third man in the race is Democratic Congressman Richard Ottinger. Buckley has been leading in some of the polls, but many Goodell voters say that they are switching to Ottinger to stop Buckley. This one could keep us guessing for a long while tonight.
Roger Mudd's watching the South. Roger?
The name of the game in the South tonight is Albert Gore in Tennessee. The first returns from Tennessee indicate that Gore is running a respectable race in the eastern part of the state, which is normally heavily Republican. But our CBS News vote profile analysis indicates Gore is in trouble. He's 1% worse off in East Tennessee than he was 6 years ago, 16% worse off than in the center part of the state, and 21% behind his rating in 1964 in the high Democratic areas.
Covering the Midwest is Dan Rather. Dan?
Walter, the weather's especially bad in parts of the Midwest, but it hasn't hurt the vote totals in Indiana, where Nixon-sponsored conservative Richard Roudebush is trying to unseat liberal Democrat Vance Hartke. Only a few early returns are in. They show, as expected, Roudebush with about a 1.5 to 1% lead over Hartke in the Indianapolis area, but Hartke's vote is especially heavy in labor areas. Other races to watch include Illinois, where Republican Senator Ralph Smith is an underdog against Adlai Stevenson III. A few scattered returns there, Stevenson out to an early lead. Democrats hope to run especially strong tonight in the Midwest gubernatorial races.
Bill Stout's our man in the West tonight. Bill?
It looks like a heavy early turnout in parts of the West, particularly California, the president's home state, with more voters than all the rest of the West combined. Most House and Senate office holders appear headed for re-election, though there are some races considered extremely close. One incumbent in trouble is Senator George Murphy of California. Recent polls give the lead to his Democratic opponent, John Tunney. We'll watch all the races, of course, and especially in those states where the president campaigned: Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, and Utah. One big question: the impact on the voters of the San Jose rock throwing at the president's rally. Walter?
President Nixon is in San Clemente, California tonight, where he wound up after 2 weeks of political hopscotching in more than a score of states. And Robert Pierpoint reports from there.
The Nixon family arrived early, a few minutes before 7, at the polling place, the Concordia Elementary School. Lady officials greeted the Nixons, the inspector in charge, Mrs. Wilma Wallington, explaining, "We'd like you to see our ballot box is not stuffed." Mrs. Nixon marked her ballot first, and it took only a few moments for her, Tricia, and the president to stamp X's on over 40 places, indicating they had in mind well in advance just how they were going to vote. After dropping their ballots in the box, the Nixons drove off to the San Clemente Civic Center and Firehouse, where they thanked the firemen for their prompt action in putting out a small fire in the Nixon home last Thursday night. Then the president talked briefly with reporters about today's election.
Mr. President, you had a famous prediction in '66. Did you have one for us this morning?
In '66, I was out a great deal, as you know.
In fact, I was out for 2 months of campaigning. And this year, while we've gone to 22 states, as you know, I did it in the space of actually 8 days of campaigning, 3 of which were on Saturday. So consequently, in such a fast-paced campaign, without the chance to stop at each place and talk to the leaders, to get the feel, I don't think an individual can make a professional prediction.
President Nixon shows more caution than Vice President Agnew and some White House aides, who are predicting that the Republicans will pick up several seats in both the Senate and the House. Instead, Mr. Nixon, like many other Americans, will wait and watch the returns come in tonight on the television screen. Robert Pierpoint, CBS News, San Clemente.
Vice President Nixon, as he voted in his home state of Maryland today, predicted that the Republicans would pick up 4 to 6 seats in the Senate. And that's more than most polls are showing by quite a margin. Former President Truman shrugged off blustery 40-degree weather to cast his ballot at a school near his Independence, Missouri home. Mr. Truman is now 86. Our other living former President, Lyndon Johnson, voted absentee some days ago. We'll be back with more on Campaign 70 later in this broadcast after a roundup of other news this day from Charles Carroll.
This winter, get more than just antifreeze. Get Prestone with the protection plan that's ironclad. Prestone protects against freeze-ups, protects against corrosion, protects against most minor leaks. Prestone protects, or write Union Carbide for your money back. This winter, get more than just antifreeze. Get Prestone with the ironclad protection plan.
I like some pastel-colored cigarettes.
That's your feather?
That is silly.
Do you have some square cigarettes in a round box? Or is it the other way around?
In this fancy frilly, you gotta have a gimmick world. There's one cigarette that doesn't go along.
Camel filters, please.
We're not about to hide our kind of easy taste behind some gimmick. Camel filters, they're not for everybody. But then, they don't try to be.
The United States Command in Saigon said today that it's about to take another major step toward Vietnamizing the Vietnam War. Officials said that several squadrons of helicopters and transport planes will be turned over to the South Vietnamese to strengthen their own airlift capacity. There was a hint today from South Vietnam's president, Nguyen Van Thieu, that he might not run for re-election next September. He told reporters in Saigon, "This job takes so much out of one. I've been looking for someone else to do it." Until now, Thieu's been busy courting voters. But he has some important opposition, headed by Major General Duong Van Minh, known as Big Men, and regarded as one of the most popular figures in the country. In Saigon, there was an observance for a well-known figure of the past in South Vietnam, and we have a report from Bill McLaughlin.
7 years ago, President Ngo Dinh Diem was toppled by the army, and he was murdered. Now, for the first time in all those 7 years, his supporters are coming out again. They are getting ready for next year's presidential elections.
This is Saigon's Mac Dinh Chi Cemetery, the final resting place for the rich and the powerful of Vietnam. The late President Ngo Dinh Diem and his brother and close advisor, Ngo Dinh Nhu, were both buried here after they were assassinated November 2nd, 1963, by South Vietnamese army officers. There have always been small, discreet memorial services for Diem, but never anything like this. Last year, a few hundred Vietnamese came to honor his memory. This year, more than 5,000 mourners, many of them from outside Saigon, are at the memorial service. Diem supporters arrive carrying a large color portrait of the late president. The crowd applauds. Many of the people here, the old in traditional costumes, and the young in Western dress, are Roman Catholics, as Diem himself was. Diem has become a kind of legend among Vietnamese. They have forgotten the troubles. They remember only that under his rule, people were happier. The war was less violent. The economy was better, and there were fewer Americans around. Diem supporters, the Can Lao, or Labor Party, hope to turn the memories into votes during next year's presidential elections. Diem supporters are the most determined anti-communist group in the nation. They believe the only real peace for Vietnam lies through military victory. Since most are Catholics, they see little future for themselves in a communist South Vietnam. Bill McLaughlin, CBS News at the Mac Dinh Chi Cemetery in Saigon, South Vietnam.
At the United Nations today, 18 countries introduced a resolution calling for the admission of Communist China and the expulsion of Nationalist China. As in past years, the proposal is expected to be rejected. The Pentagon announced that the United States naval fleet in the Mediterranean, built up during the recent Jordanian crisis, has been cut back to normal. That means the withdrawal of 1 aircraft carrier and 6 destroyers, and the Soviet Union has reduced the number of its ships in the Mediterranean too. So one small tension of the world is relaxed. In Russia, U.S. consular officials were permitted to meet with 2 American generals and a major whose plane wound up in Soviet Armenia October 21st. The officers were reported to be in good health, but there's still no word on the Soviet response to Washington's demand for their release. All of our attention in the United States is riveted on our own state and local elections today. But in faraway Chile, there was a political inauguration that may have a greater long-range effect on the United States and its policies than today's elections at home. Salvador Allende, the world's first freely elected Marxist-socialist chief of state, took office as Chile's president. It was an emotional but an orderly day in the capital, Santiago. Allende has already announced the appointment of socialists and communists to a number of key positions in one of the hemisphere's most important countries.
You work hard all your life, where does it get you? In the neck, in the back, in the arm, and in the shoulder. What are you going to do?
Absorbine Jr. Absorbine Jr. has got hard-working medicines that increase the circulation when you put it on. Penetrating heat gets deep into aching muscles, warms them up, loosens them up, relaxes them. That feels good. Absorbine Jr. works fast, too. In no time at all, your sore muscles start feeling free and natural again, like having a warm bath. It's easy to put on with its handy applicator top, and it's not greasy. Absorbine Jr., try it. After all, you work hard. You want something that works hard for you. Absorbine Jr. works as hard as you do. You know, you're a good wife.
There was an election day rally on Wall Street, but observers said buyers seemed more interested in prospects for a settlement of the General Motors strike than in political news. The volume on the New York Stock Exchange was 11,800,000 shares. The average price per share rose 31 cents on the New York Exchange and 11 cents on the American Exchange. Funeral services have begun in Saint-Laurent-du-Pont, France, for the victims of last weekend's tragic dance hall fire. Peter Kalischer reports.
Gymnasium of the Physical Culture Center at the village of Saint-Laurent-du-Pont is the scene of mass grief such as this region has not experienced since the war. The funeral services for those youths who died by fire at a Saturday night dance. No house of worship could find place for 144 coffins, and the ravaged remains of only 120 of those found in the ashes of the Sankt nightclub have been identified. The families who weep have been spared the sight of their dead. Identification has been by articles of clothing, jewelry, dental records. The majority are from this region of southeast France, but victims are from all over France and abroad, from Great Britain, from Denmark, but so far no known Americans are among those who died in the Holocaust of flame. Services are conducted by 4 faiths: Mohammedan, Jewish, Protestant, and Catholic. President Pompidou has sent his personal representative, Cabinet Minister Joseph Fontenay, to read his personal message of condolence. Preparations for the funerals take place as the families leave the scene, And as anger will supplant grief, the investigation continues as to how and why this tragedy could have happened. And there's one grim statistic. 2 of the 3 nightclub owners perished in the blaze. Peter Kalischer, CBS News, Saint-Laurent-du-Pont.
Officials in Karachi, Pakistan, say the airport luggage truck driver who rammed into a reception line for the president of Poland last Sunday has now confessed that he did it deliberately. The suspect is described as a religious fanatic who saw in Polish communism an enemy to Islam. In the crash, Polish Deputy Foreign Minister Siegfried Wolniak and 3 Pakistanis were killed. The driver has been charged with murder. Screen actress Jane Fonda was arrested at the Cleveland airport this morning and charged with smuggling drugs from Canada, hitting a customs officer, and kicking a local policeman. Police say she struck out after a large number of pills turned up in a search of her luggage, and she was then ordered to undergo a personal search. Officials later analyzed some of the pills and found them to be tranquilizers and dexedrine, a stimulant often used in diet pills. After 10 hours in jail, Ms. Fonda has been freed on bond. A big new 747 jetliner with 162 people on board pointing for Honolulu returned safely to San Francisco today after one of its 18 wheels fell off during the takeoff. The wheel landed in San Francisco Bay. A similar incident occurred in September as another 747 took off from New York. That one made it safely to Los Angeles.
Come to the Florida Sunshine Tree for fresh taste and orange juice naturally. Hi, I'm Anita Bryant, and right here is the source of all that pure, natural orange juice from Florida with that wonderful sunshine taste and natural vitamin C. There's a world of refreshing energy in every sip. Buy it as fresh frozen concentrate, or bottles and cartons, or convenient cans. Insist on 100% pure orange juice from Florida. Orange juice with natural vitamin C from the Florida Sunshine Tree. Remember, breakfast without orange juice is like a day without sunshine.
As of tonight, it's legal to criticize that Ohio grand jury report which absolved the National Guard of responsibility for the killing of 4 students at Kent State University. A federal judge today knocked down a local court order which forbade anybody involved to comment on the grand jury findings. A Justice Department summary of an FBI report, which leaked out last week, paints a far different picture from the Ohio grand jury version. The FBI says the guardsmen never thought their lives were in danger, and in the words of the report, there is some reason to believe that the claim by the National Guard that their lives were endangered was fabricated subsequent to the event. It develops today that one of the people who disagrees with the state grand jury's finding, holding the students and the university to blame, is the chaplain of the National Guard outfits that did the shooting. Robert Shackney reports.
Last May, 4 days after the Kent State shooting, CBS News learned that a National Guard chaplain who'd been on the scene was sharply critical in private conversations of the command decisions that had led to the shooting. The National Guard commanders in Columbus, Ohio, the state capital, at the time tried to keep the chaplain from making his criticisms public. I was in the office of the Deputy Guard Commander, Brigadier General Robert Canterbury, when I overheard him say on the telephone, referring to the chaplain, "We've got to shut him up. This could be fatal." Until today, that chaplain had said nothing in public. He's the Reverend John Simons, Major, United States Army, Ohio National Guard, Senior Chaplain of the 107th Armored Cavalry Regiment. In civilian life, Simons is pastor of an Episcopal church in a Cleveland suburb. Raised in a military family with generals and West Pointers, his close relatives, John Simons has worried and agonized privately about what he saw last May 4th at Kent State.
I think the initial mistake was made at the state level with the Adjutant General and the Governor, who apparently feel that every campus disorder is another Normandy invasion. And so you go in with weapons loaded with rounds, which is not, Kent campus or any other college campus is not coming up Iwo Jima. And secondly, I think that we did not have the men in enough numbers or the equipment to control that situation at noon on that day. Had we waited until, for instance, the shotguns arrived and our reserves arrived from Ravenna and where they'd been awakened from the night before, I think we could have done a better job without bloodshed. I have no idea why the shooting started, except as I reconstructed from talking to the men immediately afterwards and doing some counseling in the weeks that followed, that some were legitimately afraid and confused as to what was going on. A few were angry. And so they were in a position where someone or some could act out their fear and anger in a very lethal way. And I think this is what occurred.
And what did the men who had fired say?
Some said they had fired in the air. Some said they had not fired. One said he had fired right down the gully, meaning, and I'm sure he meant, that he had put it where it hurt.
Did he say why?
No, I don't think he had to say why. I think he was just mad and angry and tired.
Well,
sick of it.
Are you saying, in effect, that guard unit was not a controlled, disciplined military unit?
No, absolutely. Somebody fired without orders.
The unit that went up, or the men who went up, were they fresh troops? Were they tired? You tell me.
No, they were not fresh. They'd been... those men had been pulling duty between the truckers and the campus thing for several days and nights. Secondly, this was for some of those men, particularly those from the 107th, the third time, in the sense that they'd been out within a month.
There are a lot of people in Ohio who say the students had it coming. That they didn't want to get shot, they shouldn't have been rioting. The guard simply did what it had to do because the men were in danger. You've heard that argument.
I think that these perhaps bloodthirsty types who have never either fired or heard a shot fired in anger. I think they're very naive, hunting for a simple solution. After all, one of the tests of a democracy is how much dissension it will allow and how peaceful it can keep that dissension. And I think democracy lost that round.
If I had to put it simply to you, should shooting have taken place in Kent that day? Was the situation so bad that the men had to fire?
No.
You care something about the Army and care something about the National Guard. Why then are you sitting here this afternoon criticizing what they did?
Well, I happen to believe that I did not give my soul to the church when I was ordained, or to my wife when I was married, or to the Guard when I was commissioned. So I have no feelings about not criticizing if I feel it can be helpful.
A spokesman for the Ohio National Guard said there would be no comment from the Guard or its commanders about the critical remarks of Chaplain Simons. The glittering resort of Miami Beach has long pumped its raw sewage into a pipe that discharges it 2 miles out in the Atlantic. The city fathers were apparently under the impression that that's far enough out to avoid pollution of beaches. To test that theory, a private conservation organization joined with Governor Claude Kirk and the Miami News in dumping 700 bottles into the sea near the sewage outlet a couple of weeks ago, on the theory that where the bottles went, some of the sewage must also go. Today it was announced where some of the bottles went. Into the Gulf Stream near Fort Lauderdale, that's where, and onto the tourist-crowded beaches of Fort Lauderdale, Boca Raton, Pompano Beach, Hollywood, Dania, and Port Everglades.
Until now, many smokers have found that high-flavor cigarettes have been high-tar cigarettes. Until now, as cigarette tar went down, cigarette taste went down. Until now, the flavor stopped here. But now there's Vantage, the full-flavor breakthrough cigarette with the incredible new filter that doesn't cop out on flavor. Vantage, it's on the way, and it's worth waiting for.
$3.95! $3.95!
I'm Dick Butkus. Plugging holes is my business. Plugging holes is Prestone's business, too. Prestone Anti-Leak Antifreeze. It's got a protection plan that's ironclad. Prestone will stop most minor leaks anywhere in your cooling system, or write Union Carbide for your money back.
Hut,
So when it comes to plugging holes, get Prestone with the ironclad protection plan.
Polls are closing at this hour in parts or all of some dozen states, and first returns are coming in now at our CBS News election headquarters. As the races are decided and these returns grow from the present trickle to a torrent, and that won't be very long, we'll be starting to put the political mosaic together. As the evening wears on, we hope to be able to begin forming some answers to some of the many questions of this unusual political year about trends and shifts and strategy and voter attitudes and so forth. The first state with any meaningful returns at all has reported in. The state is Tennessee, and that's the area being covered by Roger Mudd. Roger?
Walter, we now have about 13% of the popular vote in Tennessee, and the margin between William Brock and Albert Gore remains relatively the same. Since we last reported, the senator has improved his position, but the most ominous figure that we can read from our model precincts is that he is falling behind in Middle Tennessee, which he has to carry easily in order to beat William Brock. In the gubernatorial race, Winfield Dunn, the Memphis dentist and Republican, is running ahead of John J. Hooker. In fact, Dunn and Brock are matching each other vote for vote. And finally, in Kentucky, in the 3rd District of Kentucky, Walter, with 54% of the vote in, the incumbent Republican congressman there, William Cowger, has fallen behind the Democrat Roman Mazzoli for the 3rd District of Kentucky.
Thank you, Roger. And those returns are going to be fascinating to watch from that corner of the country tonight, as they are from this whole nation, from, as we say, the rock-ribbed coast of Maine to the beaches of California. What we're going to be watching for tonight, clearly, is the makeup of the new House and the Senate. That's the big story. The control of state houses will be important, too. The governorships, 35 of those are up, and legislatures in 45 states. We'll be looking for the control of those state legislatures because many states reapportion this year, and the party that controls the legislature controls the reapportioning and can set a pattern in the state for 10 years to come. The mood of the nation, is it swinging right or not? That will be the underlying story of the day. The effectiveness of President Nixon and Vice President Agnew in their extraordinary campaign effort. How Democratic presidential hopefuls have run, Muskie and Humphrey and Kennedy and the others. Can television make or break a successful candidate? We'll watch that part of the story, too. All part of the returns as they come in here at our CBS News election headquarters. The full Campaign 70 coverage begins just a couple of minutes from now. But for the CBS Evening News, this is Walter Cronkite reporting.
Here is a delicious laxative drink. Just mix it up to help fix you up so irregularity won't bother you. Fruit-flavored Saratan. What a delicious way to take a laxative when lack of bulk causes a problem. Taken daily, fruit-flavored Saratan powder just mixes with water to form the laxative bulk your system may be missing. Drink sunny fruit-flavored Saratan. Mix it up to help fix you up for gentle daily regularity. It's delicious.
Lady Kazan.
I get a warm romantic motion when you use Aqua Velvet lotion. That's how our romance began. Because there's something about an Aqua Velvet man.
Men, put it on. Aqua Velvet with humectant. It's so good for your face. And oh, that manly fragrance. Aqua Velvet. Put it on.
This has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Charles Kuralt. Election returns with Walter Cronkite and the CBS News team next on CBS.
Chris Clark at 6. Jerry Gold at 10. Bob Lobertini at 6:15 and 10:15. Channel 5 Sports at 6:20 and 10:20. Get the complete picture of news, weather, and sports Monday through Saturday at 6 and 10 on Channel 5, Nashville's #1 television station.
Hi, I'm Pat from Preston Lincoln Mercury, and I'd like to tell you about a little thing that makes the 1971 Lincoln a better car. See this little button? It's mounted behind the...